Welcome back to another episode of Just
Justice
Squirrel
Squirrel
looking
looking for
for
a
a
nut,
nut,
trying to
trying to
trying
get
to
out
get out
of
of
this
this
rut.
rut.
Not bad, right? A little bit too creative on these, but hey. I love doing these together with people because I think there's something to be said about laughter and just comedy in general. I've learned that through my experience, it breaks down through a lot of different barriers and walls and discomfort and nerves and whatever it is. So I'm glad we're able to do this. So on the topic of being too creative, I figured one way that I wanted to start out this conversation is maybe even identifying what does it mean to be creative to begin with. Vaughn, I know you've been doing a lot of work in this space yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I have been exploring from bits and pieces and trying to better understand what it means for myself. What I've learned is actually when I started the creative path, it's taken me down a very interesting journey. And that is, I think I've been able to express different elements of myself that I may or may not have been able to do so before. But I've also realized that it was challenging. It was challenging in many ways because once I started it, I realized my circle changed. So the people who were closest to me, I can't say that it's the same group that I started off with. And I think part of it has to do with just full expression of who I was. And then maybe, I don't know, not understanding or feeling a different way about what I should have been and how I should have expressed things. But I figured maybe one way to even kick this off is to define what does it mean to be creative to begin with.
Well,
Vaughn,
I
would you
like
like-
what I like what you said about like self-expression. I think creativity, I mean, the work I do is in creativity, particularly creative problem solving. And oftentimes, people think creativity is about artistry. And really, I look at creativity as a capacity that every single person has. We're all innately creative. My
Mhm.
creativity is going to look very different on me than it is going to look on you, right? And for some people, their creativity is artistry, it's oil painting, it's opera singing, it's a skill like that. But what's behind that skill is just this capacity to have self-expression. And everyone can do that. I mean, I think a lot of people say I'm not creative, but you really think about how do you express yourself? I guarantee you do it in a way that's different than anyone else you know, right? So that for me, creativity is more about self-expression and exploring ideas through different perspectives. The work I do in creative problem solving is literally this idea of taking ideas that don't go together and putting them together and coming up with something new and innovation.
Do you think a world, I guess it's probably a matter of opinion, but in general, do you think a world is built to highlight that creative process?
Is the world built to highlight a creative process? I don't think so. I mean, I don't really think, especially when I think about like a corporate environment, it's not, right? It truly is not. And that's what I'm trying to do is bring more creativity and the creative process to the workplace. For a few reasons. Number one is like this idea of like the fact that we're all innately creative. I think that's the best approach to bringing to the workplace. And what I've seen in my work is that through creativity and allowing people to express themselves in a creative way in the workplace for idea generation, for problem solving, what that really does is it levels the playing field, right? It levels the playing field so everyone is able to share ideas in a way that makes sense for them. But to go back to the question, I think I mean, at least here in the corporate environment, I think we live in a society where hard skills, analytical thinking is prioritized over creativity for the most part. I do see that there's a shift happening, but for the most part, I think that is where we've been coming from, is this idea that hard skills and analytical thinking is more important than creativity.
I realized the same exact thing, and I also realized one of the other things that I've noticed through my journey is how linear thinking sometimes is more valued than, let's say, like some of the out of the box processes that people are able to do. And so I was really curious, like, and the other thing that you pointed out that I think interesting is in regard to the shift, because I've seen the same thing, but I've also wondered how much of that shift is just solely happening within my sphere,
Right.
so to
That's true.
speak, or rather, is it actually like a global shift that's happening even outside of the people that I'm connected with? And so I don't have I don't have an answer to that question by any means, but I've been just genuinely curious. Like, is that actually something that other people are noticing as well, outside of the networks they're connected to, or is that or is that a story I'm creating, thinking that okay, this is the direction we're all heading in? Casey.
So can you be too creative? I don't think you can be too creative. I mean, that's like saying, can you have too much love, right? Or can you have too much fun? So I'm going to go out and
My
say,
parents did tell me I had too much fun though, from time to
but
time.
right. But from whose point of whose perspective,
True.
yours or theirs,
Very
right?
true.
And they're saying you're having too much fun. And I know that they might have just been joking, but they're saying you're having too much fun because you're not fitting in the
Yeah.
role that they or society wants for you, right? So, and I know your parents were probably just joking when they said that, but we'll give them a hard time.
I
But
hope so.
when so all right, so let's go to, I mean, we like to define it. And so when you think of the word create,
Mhm.
creation, but it really means to give birth to, begat, to make grow, right? That's going back to 1500 Latin and Old English. And so there's this idea of creating, of growing, of begatting, of birthing out into the world. So that's one. I think if you look at more of a modern definition, you think of creative or creation, Ven, as you were talking about around imagination and
Mhm.
new ideas, whether they're, I don't think there's any new idea. We see so far because we stand on the shoulder of giants, right? So I don't know if there's any new idea, but there's new ways of putting things together.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Uber, founder aside, but Uber was very creative because it took things that we all knew, a phone, a car, and a GPS and a satellite, and combined them in ways no one had ever considered.
Mhm.
So that was very creative, right? So when I think of, to start off with, to your question, Oleg, your pre-question of, how do we define creative? There's an element of that it's new, it's unique, it's innovative, but I think, Van, to your point about like encouraging people that they're all creative, I think it's really around this element of growing, of birthing something. And
Mhm.
while we all humans are, you can say we're all one, we're all very unique. I mean, if we believe we're all one, we can believe we're all different. If we believe we're all one, and there's one energy and connectedness and everything Disney movie says, we're still all unique aspects of that. And so I really like this idea that, creativity is something where it's a birth, it's a creation, to use the word as I define it. But one thing that I heard that really jumped out to me is creative is birthing. The opposite of creativity is boredom. And
Hmm.
Mm.
you mentioned corporate America. There are real advantages to being bored, to being straight in line, and all of that. And so I'll stop there, but I really think creativity, really came from this idea of birthing something new. We've sort of in the modern day sprinkled imagination and innovation on it, particularly in our modern day world, tech world, and where we are online. And then I also think that at the end of the day, if you're not being creative, you're probably pretty bored or stayed or anxious or in neutral.
Do you think at the end of the day, and this is a question to either of you, creativity is the thing that truly separates us as beings
Separates us from what?
from each other, as
Human to
well as
human?
other beings? Uh huh.
I think it connects us versus separates us. Right? Because it's sort of like, I mean, like I talk about the idea that creativity is a commonality for everyone. And when I say that, I do think of, just how I see creativity working um, in the work I do when you get together and you ask people to problem solve, to
Hmm.
generate ideas in a creative way, and you allow that space and give them the tools to do so. What I find is connectedness. Now, are the individual ideas different? Yes, right? So like just as Casey was saying, our imagination, our creativity, our ability to put different things together and create something new that's individual to us. But the idea about using creativity in a group setting, what I find is that it generates connectedness.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree there. And I think the only thing that really, some of the major things that get in the way of creativity, I believe, as Van was saying, it's all in us. I really do. I feel in the work I've done with helping lawyers leave the law and corporate strategy work I've done, the main thing that gets in the way of creativity has nothing to do with creativity. It's the fear of rejection. It's being tired. It's, I just don't want to think about it. Will someone else do it? It's, I feel I'm not creative. It's a lack of self-worth. It's a lot of those blockers that get in the way. And if you have a workshop or a facilitator, or you're in that environment that really, and Van, this is what you do, that really pulls it out. It is just that, it's pulling it out of someone, and it's already there. It's nurturing it.
That's right. Yes.
Do you find that in either of your cases, because this is another thing I've been curious about, and I wish Scott Mason was able to join us on this conversation as well, but him and I had a conversation about this exact topic, and that's being creative and how creatives are perceived in the world, as well as I think the meaning that we choose to assign due to the feedback that people give us. Is it ever a challenge to be a creative in the world that you live in?
Well, I wish Scott was here just so we could disagree and yell at
him. He would have plenty to share, but like that's something that I've realized within my own life, amongst many other people. And I know that, Casey, you may or may not agree with this, but a lot of it has to do with the meaning that I choose to project on it. So if someone says, oh, stop, entrepreneurship is a perfect example that I could think of. When are you going to go get a real job? When are you going to do X, Y, and Z? When are you going to give up this silly dream of yours to actually pursue something that is in line? And I know that as part of that process, it's taken me a long time to reframe, to develop my own meaning around it, and to let go of the weight that I was carrying of other people on my shoulders. But I'm wondering, in either of your cases, is that ever a challenge? Do you find that to be a challenging? And if so, what is actually challenging for you in being a, so to speak, creative in the world that we live in?
Well, Van, that's a hard question, so I'm gonna let you answer it, but I have a question. I'll let you do it first. My question is, how do you define a creative, Oleg?
I think for me, I look at creative similar to what we've said before, but I also think of a creative who goes against the grain from time to time. I think of a creative who is able to push the boundaries of self-expression, and that is expressing my ways in ways that I may or may not have done so before. So I'll give you an example. The way that I think I express myself in front of my family is probably drastically different than the way that I express myself in front of my best friend. I think a lot of that has to do with my level of trust, comfort, and shared experience. My friends and I, we have been through experience that my parents and I have never been through. I hope to never go through, right? Just variety of things during our childhood. And I think as part of that, I've realized how much of a different persona I put on from time to time, depending on who I'm in front of. So when I think about this term creative, that's one of the things that comes to mind to me is being able to go against the grain in certain situations, because it feels like that is the direction that it's pulling me to really express who am I at my core, or who I think I am at my core. And then is through that process of exploration, I'm able to find more and more of who I believe I am. And does that make sense?
Yes, it does, and I think it's this is a whole other, we can have another 2-hour conversation about this. But just kind of from what you're saying, I will say, like, I'm a Vietnamese refugee, right? I was raised by very traditional Vietnamese parents, and the idea of being a creative, an artist, being anything other than an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer was not in the cards. I mean, clearly it
Mhm.
was, because I'm not, neither of the three children are any of those. Um, but the definition, I was raised in a household where the definition of creativity, of artistry, was looked down upon, right? So
Mm.
I think it depends. I feel like it's so interesting because in my household growing up, there was like I would look down upon if I wanted to take an art class, if I wanted to study art. But then when you go out in the world, other people have very different definitions of creatives, and they're embraced, and being different and being progressive and um, going against the norm is something that's celebrated. So I almost say, like, and this took me a long time to learn for myself, is I'm just who I am, right? This is how
Mm.
I create. This is how I express myself creatively. There's a there's a it's like an assessment called the VIA character strengths assessment. It's a values in action. It's a free one, and I only took about 2 years ago. And my top two character strengths are curiosity and creativity. And I would have to say, for most of my life into my adulthood, in the corporate environment, I never expressed those two things, right? I never expressed them because I was trying to fit in. It didn't seem right to bring my creativity or curiosity into the corporate world. And now that I lead with that in every situation, I lead with curiosity, I lead with creativity. I've benefited from it. The people around me have benefited from it. My business has benefited from it. And I look back at those other environments, um, where I where I focus on fitting in rather than using my character strengths, and I realize, like, what a disservice. What a disservice to myself at the time, and what a disservice to the people that I really could have impacted. So what I mean, it may not be creativity for some people, but whatever those character strengths are, we're talking about creativity. That's why I bring this up. But what if I had inserted creativity in the pharmaceutical industry that I worked in? What if I
Mm.
had inserted my creativity and curiosity in when I was getting my MBA, right? Like, what could that have looked like? Yes, if I would have rubbed people the wrong way, but it would have been innate to who I am. And I probably could have brought value to the situation.
Was that a challenge? Was that a challenge to be a creative, considering your culture and what you were raised in?
I mean, it wasn't a challenge because I didn't do it, right,
Mhm.
for a long time. So I think it was a challenge um, it was a challenge in the sense that I always felt like I wasn't in the right place, or I wasn't doing the right thing. I wasn't true to myself. So that was the challenge.
Mhm. Casey?
I feel that a creative, it serves a purpose like a court jester. Putin needs a court jester right now. The dude is taking himself just way too seriously, and I know it's a horrible situation, and I'm making a little bit light of him, but I mean, he is so I'm only surmising the mental state he's in and how
Mhm.
self-serious and anxious he is right now. And I know he's a brilliant s- tactician and knows exactly what he's doing, and maybe, but I feel he's very desperate, and he needs a court jester. He needs someone to just take, like you said, take the pressure off a little. He needs to laugh a little. And moving away from him to the rest of us, I think a creative, whether it's Chris Rock, whether it's Banksy, whether it's just something your kids that they create, a stick figure from preschool and or wherever, it gives that it brings you back down to earth. It
Mm.
makes you feel less serious. It shows you what to prioritize. I think the reasons a lot of creatives are marginalized or looked down upon, Van, you grew up with, in my life, we were third generation Jewish, second generation Jewish Americans. So we we're pretty American. And it wasn't that creativity was forbidden. It's just, it wasn't, my parents weren't artists in that way, but
Mhm.
they enjoyed it. So it wasn't looked down upon. It just wasn't, I played baseball and I just didn't really think of myself as a creative. I did other things. But I think that it's so needed to really to ground us and to make us laugh. And when you laugh, how can you take things seriously unless it's a nervous laughter? How can you take things really seriously? And so I think, creativity. Oh, so what I was going to say is I think a lot of families and people not only they may suppress the creativity or push it out because they are based on fear, or they're based on productivity, or they're attached to a certain identity, whether it's and this is all fine, I get it, but whether, my kids are going to be Ivy League and this, and so when you have an attachment to a certain identity or role or label or achievement, then that's your focus. And I think creativity can be looked at, at worst, it's something to be feared. At the very least, it's something that is inefficient and doesn't help you meet your goal.
How do either of you raise your kids when it comes to that? When it comes to introducing them to the concept of creativity and curiosity, and share as much as you wish. And I just feel like there's a reason why we had a conversation prior to the conversation, so to speak. And you said this yourself, but I'm curious, like in your guys' perspective, from a parent perspective, how do you introduce that to the kids? Because in my case, I think it was different, not necessarily better or worse. My parents definitely encouraged me to pursue things like sports. When I was in middle school, they encouraged me to play the clarinet. Then they encouraged me to play the piano, which, if I'm being fully honest, I was not a big fan of. And the only reason why I was not a big fan of was I was not a big fan of practicing. I truly did not enjoy sitting behind an instrument and practicing for an hour. My brother, on the other hand, complete opposite. The guy would spend 3 hours practicing the guitar on a daily basis. And so it really gets me curious as far as the parents' perspective. What do the parents do? Like, what do you do in either of your cases to encourage your kids to be creative, to be curious? Like, are there specific things that you start? And if so, I mean, what age? How do you do it?
You give them a bunch of pills and push and push.
I feel like that's a later stage, right?
I'm the one. Yeah, we're the ones taking the pills, actually, Oleg.
Just kidding. We take the pills.
That's right.
Go, Van.
Casey, you want to get started with this one?
You start.
Okay. So I will say, again, because of the way I was raised, Catholic school, strict environment, there was not a lot of, what do you think, Vaughn? Like, what are your ideas? And so I have veered the complete opposite direction with Nico. He gets to be a wild child, and I want to say, like, I'd say, like, oh, let's get creative. I don't introduce him to a lot of like my creative tools, even though once he sees me doing it, if he's curious about it, then he jumps in. So I would say the way I've been raising him in his creativity is just nurturing curiosity, right? So whatever he's curious about, we follow that curiosity. And the school he went to in preschool, he went to a school like a Reggio Emilio school, which is an Italian school. The philosophy is child-led learning, right? If the kids were interested in bees, they would do all their work around bees, like the artwork, the math work, the reading work, whatever it is. And I think I followed that very loosely, where what he's interested in, we let him pursue. As we were talking about, Casey, before we start recording here, before we went live, is that relates also to what he does on the computer. Like, oftentimes, like, oh my gosh, that kid's been on the screen, like, I need to get him off the screen. But as Casey was saying, like, Casey went to his son's room and he wanted him off the screen, yet his son was doing something very creative and analytical on the screen and learning. So really, for us to be able to expand our perspective of what creativity is too, and let these kids learn in their own way and create in their own way, even though now we're the parents, even though it doesn't look like what we think creativity should look like, right? For me, it's like, oh, don't you want to paint? Don't you want to draw? No, he doesn't. He wants to create worlds on Minecraft.
What is your I'm just quickly curious, what is your fine line between imposing something onto your kid and then letting the kid do it themselves?
I mean, sense? I'm the wrong person out. I impose nothing on my child. This is why
I truly hope your kids watch this.
What about you, Casey? Your kids are a little bit older. I'd love to learn a little bit from you.
If you're learning from me, you so
at least we're being transparent.
Oh man. So, we sort of I agree with Van, letting them nurture and follow their curiosity and what they're after. And I have similar stories. For us, it became a little bit more drastic and entrenched. And as we were talking about before we started recording, was we homeschool, and my daughter was in third grade. My son was in kindergarten, then first grade. And they said, we don't want to be in a traditional school. And it was the school I went to, a private school here in San Francisco. And we tried one more school for my daughter, and I think two more schools for my son. We tried Montessori, we tried Waldorf, we tried a nature school, tried all types. And I won't get into the details why, but I think for us, their schooling, and this was pre-COVID, their schooling has really been unintentionally, but been built on child-led and what direction they want. And it took a while. We've had stops and starts and didn't know what the heck we were doing, but we're in a good spot now, a mix between online, OutSchool, OUT School is a great platform we use. We have people here in our neighborhood that we use, go in person, and some other platforms. So it's a mix of things. We also were on vacation in Mexico last week, and we didn't just sit on the beach. We went to jungle tours. There was other educational things. We went snorkeling, like went Mayan tours on a tour there and learned the history. So you find ways, and when your son is talking about howler monkeys with their Latin genus name, and is talking to the tour guide for hours about rescuing animals, and just knows the whole geography of Central America and knows the Mayan gods, you're sitting there saying, one, where did you take the time to do this? So
who are you?
who are
Yeah.
you?
How do you know this?
And your daughter is speaking in and wants to save esoteric languages from being extinct, and is talking in sort of some Mayan words. And the Mayan person is like, how does this gringo know how to speak this way, right? So when you look at that, you realize that a lot of the teaching, as a parent, I'm not even qualified to do, and I just need to let well enough be alone, right? But you provide that structure. I mean, hey, brush your teeth. Let's get up. You have a class at 9. I want you on. Here's where we're going to go. We do a lot of schlepping to outside, and no, you have to be on top. No, you have to comb your hair. No, you have to listen. What did they say? I mean, there's a lot
Let
of
me take notes here.
Yeah, exactly.
Take some notes here.
It sounds basics, but my kids will not. They will go weeks without brushing their teeth if you let them, right?
Absolutely.
But then, and part of that I realized with my son, like the feeling of it, and he doesn't want to wear jeans because they're too rough for him. Here I am yelling at him to put jeans on, and he's like, "Can you just give me softer pants?" Oh, okay, right. So I realized how little I know. So I think it comes. We definitely let them follow a lot of the topics they have. My daughter's taking an algebra class, which she's not that excited about, but we want her to take that. But ultimately, when you think about the end in mind, we know many homeschool parents whose kids are in college. They're in four-year colleges, they're in normal colleges, small colleges. Many colleges have a homeschool application on their website now. So if you're worried that your child's going to be on their couch at age 28, well, they might be, but even college grads are now. But I mean, it really doesn't matter how you get there, as long as, most of all, I think the biggest thing that we teach them and we provide them is love and support.
Absolutely.
We are really to a fault, and to a point of like, I'm definitely wrapped around their finger, and there are definitely times where they're taking advantage of me. I get it. But we do that because they know how loved and supported they are. I mean, there's no abandonment here.
Yeah.
So.
And what, at the end of their case, what came to me as you were speaking too, is this idea of, when you raise your children in that way and you give them that autonomy to a certain point, right? Is what you're doing is you're building their confidence.
Yeah.
And I think, love and growing up as a child that has self-confidence, those two things are so important. You're really raising healthy adults when you're giving them love, and that you're giving them a foundation of self-confidence.
You hit the nail on the head, and it just made me think. I mean, we went through many years of a lack of self-confidence. My son is still sort of dealing with that. He's younger, but my daughter, who just couldn't fit in and had trouble fitting in, still to a certain extent, she just fit in at a certain Sea Scouts. It's like Boy Scouts, but it's on ships in the water here in San Francisco Bay, and she just has clicked. and her confidence is through the roof. She's like too sarcastic now. Part of me wants to tone her down. But to your point, I mean, it's probably one of the first times in her life where confidence is more the norm than anything else. And it's so beautiful.
That's awesome.
What do either of you wish your kids get to? And I know this might be a complicated or confusing question, but like, is there an old, not necessarily like you made it type of thing, but like, what is that? Is there that version that either of you strive for as a parent, that once you reach an element of it, it's like, okay, I did what I could, and you know, I was able to provide support. Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
I want them to get to the sink so they can brush their teeth. I mean, I literally,
Right.
no. What do I want them
But
to get?
is that a real thought? Is that a real thought for the two of you as a parent?
I think we're very atypical parents in a sense, right? Like, I don't, because when you ask them, like, I don't know what that I just want him to and I think the school we put him in kind of nurtures this too. They talk about like your child, when they graduate from the school, you're going to recognize your child, right? We're not trying to make these kids in everyone in the school is going to go get into an Ivy League school, right? The idea is the school and the way we raise Nico is nurturing him into who he's supposed to be or who he wants to be. And I think, I mean, there's like this is esoteric, but like, I think as children, we all knew, like, we all have a sense of who you are. And then we lose that over time, right? As people take our creativity away, as people take our identity away and tell you, oh, you should be a lawyer, you should be a doctor, you should be an engineer. Von's good at math, which is a lie, by the way, I'm not. So for me, it's like, I just want him to be a happy, healthy adult. If that means living in the jungles, you know, and working with animals, like, so be it. And not making a ton of money, it doesn't make a difference to me, right? And honestly, like, I truly believe that. For like a lot of people will look at that and be like, really, don't you want your son to make a lot of money? Don't you want him to take care of you? I don't have that expectation of my child.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, I've seen in myself, and I help at Leave Law Behind, unhappy attorneys leave the law. I mean, I've seen what it is. Personally, the success I've had in life, that I've abandoned and moved on just for entrepreneurial things and other stuff. And then, which wasn't easy at all. And I've had a lot of lumps. And then all the attorneys who come for me to help them to leave the legal profession and find a non-law job. I mean, these people are making a lot of money. They're in, on paper, high-powered firms. I was just talking with someone who clerked for the Supreme Court and is at a very top-notch law firm, you know, and they're all unhappy. Not all, the ones that come to me are unhappy. And I would guess, I mean, there's a million lawyers in America. I think 80% are unhappy. And I think 40% want out. So other people will argue with that, but I think so. And so they've made it. They've gotten to what you're talking about, Oleg. And so, and you see this in many, many other professions. And so so if you keep doing what you're doing, you keep getting what you're getting. I don't want them to go to law school or to just go into investment banking, or even to go into tech and be an engineer and hate it. I know many engineers who don't like it. So what do I want them to do? I don't know. They'll find that out and I will help them. But I want them to ultimately, like Van said, really what I want is a sense of enlightenment, a sense of awakening. And before everyone pillages me and says, what the hell is that? Really,
yeah, what is that?
Enlightenment, really, being awake is really this idea of realizing that you're not a separate being in this container of bones and skin. It's realizing that there's a connectedness. It's realizing who the I is, who the you is, the collective. And so and Oleg, you and I have talked about it. I mean, when you have that sense of peeking out of the matrix, when Neo saw the ones and zeros, when he stopped the bullets, when Jim Carrey in the Truman Show looked up and saw he was on a studio set and realized there was more to it, that's where I want my kids to get.
Fast forward to all our children, Casey being investment bankers.
Yeah. Split screen. Split screen.
I was like, but wait, I wanted to visit you in the jungle.
I want you in a jungle and light and stopping
right.
bullets. And now you're doing derivative trading.
Is creativity a critical role of a parent, critical skill of a parent?
I would have to say it's something that whether it happens to you no matter what, right? Like as a parent, you gain these skills these superpowers that you didn't know you had, or you have to gain them. Like for me, creativity kind of comes naturally to me as a parent. Patience is one. I'm like, oh, this child was given to me so I could work on that skill. But I would say, I mean, Casey, I'm sure you would agree with this. Like you have to, and it's not even like a conscious effort, like, oh, I need to be creative. It's in everything. It's like, oh, there's no mayonnaise for the sandwiches. What can I do to get this kid to eat something? Right? Like it's just like little things every single day forces you to become creative.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Go ahead, Casey.
I think it is, working from home isn't a new thing. I mean, back in the Middle Ages and for many years, you had a small house and you lived here, and then below it was the shop. You were carpenters or blacksmith or whatever the case is. And the children saw what the parents did. And some went into the family business and didn't want to, but they were able to see this skill, this creativity being done, woodcraft or whatever the case may be. And so we fast forward past the Industrial Revolution and now into the information age and the professional work. And so, and then people go to offices. Your children didn't really see what you did. They just know you did this thing called work, and then you came home. And hopefully you weren't too tired or didn't have a drink, and maybe you played ball with them, but they didn't see what you did. And so one thing that I really like is, my children, I've been working for home for years, get to see what I do. They see me speaking. They just walked in and interrupted me, and I tried not to make a face at them.
Is that intentional as far as working from home and like not getting in an office?
For me, it has. I mean, I've been working from home since 06, and I mean, I've gone into offices, but I love it. I can jog my dog in the middle of the day, and I love going out and getting dinner and drinks and socializing. I'm an extroverted person, but I really love working from home. And I think a byproduct of it is they understand what Google Docs are, and they're writing, and a lot of the stuff that I and my wife do, I can see them pick up on. And one thing my daughter said is I was sort of bemoaning the fact that I wasn't teaching my daughter woodcraft. And she said that a lot of the introspection I've been doing and that we've been talking about, she said, that's something that you have taught me, which made me feel better. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's part of, I think if you stifle your creativity as a parent, not only are you hurting, but as a model for your children, they're not getting that creativity. They're not seeing you do the woodcraft or play ball or do writing or jump on a podcast, right? Or the things Van does, all the creative things you do in your work. It's great to see them do it. You may not realize right away, but kind of subconsciously, those type of skills are being embedded in them that they either use or they appreciate.
Oh, yeah. I 100% agree. And as you're talking, I think about my childhood, right? My mom, growing up, like my mom had to be curious, creative out of necessity. Like our background as Vietnamese refugee. She was one of the first 20 Vietnamese manicurists in the United States. But you think about right now, like you're a manicurist and you need some supplies, you go and order on Amazon, right? Sure. Back then, like she would drive us around or actually get on a bus and take us around to hardware stores and buy like a piece of wood and some sandpaper. And we would go home and make her supplies with her. Or something broke in the house, like we didn't have the money to get some things fixed. She was like, okay, a toothpick and some duct tape, and get creative about it. So this concept, and it really wasn't until, I mean, I started my business about 6 years ago. It wasn't until about 3 years ago where I looked at my work around curiosity and creativity. I'm like, oh, I didn't just come up with this. Like I grew up with this. I saw it day to day, and that's exactly what you're doing for your kids, Casey. Like you're showing them day to day. Like your creativity, how you've started this business and grown this business and how you're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that I find interesting that both of you brought this up is there have been so many times where I would acknowledge a certain thing about my mom or my dad as far as what they've taught me. And I remember this has happened many times, but my mom would just say like, I just that just came up to me at, in the last minute, like same exact thing in regard to the mayo analogy. Like she's like, yeah, we just didn't have that. So I just put, sriracha or ketchup. And I was just like,
and it became your favorite thing, right?
But that became my favorite, that was my go-to snack. Like as soon as she made that change, I remember as a little kid thinking like, how did she know? One thing I hope to never forget. So I was a huge PB&J fan. I mean, I had PB&J since I was, 12, 13 years old, and like on and on. My brother is also a huge fan of it. Him and I had very different styles. I would put a lot of jelly on the sandwich. He did the reverse. He would put a lot of peanut butter and very little jelly. So one day, this was, I don't remember what age I was, but it was on one of our summer vacations. My mom cut the sandwich into 4. And I don't know what happened, but for some reason, like that sandwich went from, a 5 to a 50. And I was really like, I never understood. I was like, how did she come up with that? How did she know to do all of that? And I asked her many years later, and she's like, I just did it because I thought it would be easier to digest and, all these other things. So it's just fascinating. Like I'm fascinated by so many parents and what they're able to do as far as their creative approach to parenting, and how much it just shows that at the end of the day, maybe the lesson there is that we're all trying to figure out from one step to the next. And Mr. Mason walks in a very creative fashion.
Hi, Scott.
My peeps are in the house. Whatever Casey has said, he's wrong.
He said you would say that.
Yeah, we literally just said that.
Ms. Scott, good to see you. Everyone's agreeing with me, man. I don't know what to do with myself.
Don't worry, I'm ready to pick a fight.
Yeah, he's ready for a fight.
Go ahead. Well, I'm assuming that you listened to the 43 minutes of conversation. So
what I want to know is, can you be too creative? I want to know what Vaughn has to say about that in particular.
When I saw the question, I'm like, no, you can't be too creative, right? And I do believe, you can't be too creative. Yes, you might be too creative for some people, but I think like creativity is the more you use, the more you have, right? The more you use, the more you have, and there's no limit to each of us being creative. There's no limit to us collaborating on creativity. Might it be too much for some people and for some environments? Yes. And when you think about putting limitations on creativity, I think there is value in creating environments where there's limitations as you're being creative, right? Mm-hmm. I just did a workshop. I was in Austin, Texas with my friend Eric Brown, who's a Green Beret or retired Green Beret. He started a company called Imperial Consulting, where he brings out groups of executives to look at strategy, build high-performing teams through the approach of what they call the Green Beret approach. So, through what they've learned as Green Berets over their careers. And he brought me in to do a session on Lego series play around strategy. And what was so interesting was day one was all about the Green Beret approach. And what they looked at was this idea of like, here's an issue we have, or here's a mission we have to accomplish, and how are we going to approach it? This group over here, you're going to use constrained thinking, right? Here are your limitations. This group over here, you're going to use unconstrained thinking. You have no limitations. And the next day with my work, I approached that same topic with what we use in creative problem solving is called divergent and convergent thinking. Mm-hmm. And in divergent thinking, wild, crazy ideas, there's no limitations. You just put on the table any idea. And then in convergent thinking, what you do is you take all those wild ideas now and then put parameters to it, so that you can get to something that you can actually move forward with. So it was interesting to see that in such different landscapes, right? Like the Green Beret military approach and Lego serious play, that there's the same concept of allowing people to think without constraints and then putting constraints on them to be able to take your ideas and move them forward.
Scott, do you think you're being too creative with what you do? Because you have a very creative approach to all of this using... Go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny because before coming here, I was actually giving a speech before a chapter of National Speakers Association that was kind enough to have me. And I'm finding myself afterwards wondering exactly that. Was I too creative? Were people able to relate to me? Was I too energetic in my approach to my creativity? Was I being so crazy that I was moving into just plain loopy? What were people thinking? How will this be received? I am trying to bring something new and different out into the world. And there may be challenges that are associated with that. I can't help but think about people who were too creative for their own time. I don't know if any of y'all remember that song Funky Town from the 80s. I know, Oleg, you've never heard of that. Oh, you know it, Oleg?
No, absolutely not.
I've never heard that.
Not yet. This will be the next song on my playlist as soon as this broadcast is over.
That's horrible. But I will tell you
good.
this.
What do you mean?
Yeah, believe it or not, these people were one-hit wonders. But believe it or not, they actually released a series of albums afterwards. And anyone who listens to these albums, they were brilliant. The instrumentation, the singing, the arrangements, they all preceded what was to come in electronic music by years. I mean, you could listen to them today and they only sound very slightly dated, if that at all. They were too creative.
So
no one bought these things.
Right. So for you specifically, Scott, knowing that and knowing there's so many examples in history about people who are too creative for their time, will that stop you or will that make you change what you're putting out there in the world?
I've had to look at myself honestly because of this. This has come up here before, but I have gotten some feedback about what I'm putting out in the world. Some of which has been positive, some of which recently has been very negative, harshly negative. I would even say hurtfully negative. And part of me has said to myself, I've used this as an opportunity for self-discovery. And I've said, well, really, what am I doing? It's possible that what I'm putting out may not be well received. That there are, it's possible that it will be well received, but it's going to need me. I'm going to need to put it out for a while, then gradually have it seep into find the right people, whatever. That's always a possibility too. But it's possible that that no one will receive it whatsoever. Or that it will only be received by an audience that is so limited that it doesn't do me any financial good. And one of the things that I certainly, and I've been candid with people that I've talked to one-on-one about this, I certainly look around and sometimes see people putting branding or online content or programs together that are exactly like everyone else does. They just have it slightly different, or it's just their personality that's slightly different. I am a LinkedIn coach that does it this way, that's slightly different than the person that does it that way. Or I'm a personal brand person who write all of this sort of stuff. And I see them sometimes having what appears to be an impact, at least financially, if you believe what they put out there, much more quickly than I likely will. And that feedback to that effect has been some of the hurtful feedback that I've received. And I've come to use this as a way to think, well, again, what am I doing this for? Your homie needs to make a living. But I'm also seeking to change the discourse, to bring something new into the world. All my life, I sat there working for these large organizational environments, the government of all things, where creativity was the last thing that anyone would celebrate. If anything, that was a mark of shame. And I felt suppressed and oppressed, limited and damaged by that. So this is my last dance, my last chance to be able to be out there and be the true creative person that I was actually meant to be and didn't have a chance to for over a quarter of a century. And will it succeed? I don't know. But I am willing for now to take that risk. I am willing to be that person that rather than being the person who does exactly the same thing that everyone else does, the only difference is Scott Mason is saying it with a different logo. Scott Mason looks pretty in his little tie. If that's the only difference, or a tube top, whatever I might be wearing. We'll talk about that during another conversation, right? Oh, I might not be that, but I will at least hopefully have changed some minds.
Yeah. I'd like to speak to that, Scott, because I mean, I adore you. I adore what you do, how you do it. It's so different. It's so creative. And like we said, with creativity, no, there's no limits to creativity, and there's never too much creativity. but like we said, it might be too much for a certain time, a certain person. We live in a time where even your example, Funky Town, was it? Right? They didn't have access to the
I gotta
entire
look this up.
world. Right? We have access now to the entire world. What if Funky Town, what if Van Gogh had access to the entire world?
Yeah.
Maybe he would have found success in his lifetime, right? If he had just kept going.
That's a good point.
Something that I read when I started my business was, because I faced the same thing. Like I went to all these networking events, like, oh yeah, I bring creativity into the workplace, and people would just laugh at me, right? Oh, what do you do, pottery, right? Like,
right?
And,
aren't you kooky?
yeah, exactly. But I read something about, and you have to be willing to take that risk too, right? Like I was fortunate in a position where I had saved enough money, I had to quit my job. My husband has a stable salary, and I was able to keep going. So this whole idea of what I read in the book was start and keep going, right? Now I have to say, like, I was in a position I could start and keep going, even though I didn't generate an income for quite some time.
Yeah.
But I believed in what I was doing, and I was willing, just like you're saying, like to take that risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that, at least for me, I find it important. And in this whole concept of, are you too early for the people here, so to speak, or are you not? For me, really trying to understand what is that why am I doing this and who am I doing it for has been important. And I realized the same exact thing that, for some people, I might be in the early process of it all, but at the same time, at the end of the day, I guess, why does that have to be the limitation that I set upon myself? I look at I've studied quite a few people, Steve Jobs and whoever. I'm sure there have been times where any of them could have stopped because they weren't received the same exact way that, like, the iPhone is received today. Literally, the iPhone is a part of me now. 20 years ago, it was not. So I look at things like that, and I get curious in your case, Scott, and everyone else, if you can relate. And that is, how often are we truly the limitation? How often do we project meaning onto something that could just remain neutral for however long, and thinking that I'm too early, the world's not ready for me yet. The world's not ready to receive the Scott Mason of the world, so to speak. So that's another thing that I get curious, like, how often do we project those limitations?
And use the creativity within our imagination in a way that is not necessarily constructive, and maybe should be bounded a little bit when it comes to the roles that we choose to play within the myths that we are creating for our lives, specifically the role of the victim.
Yeah, Scott, man, I don't believe you, dude. I mean, it's harsh. Listen, I'm just going to tell you, 1, you can make money. 2, I don't think there are a limited amount of people. And these people that said it's harsh, 1, I think they're probably saying something different. I think you're probably projecting onto them, but they could be coming. They could, I don't know what, who knows? Let's assume it is harsh and they really don't like it. Let's assume it is. For me, that's only an indicator that you're right where you need to be. Seriously.
And Scott is someone like I agree, Casey. Like, Scott is someone, like, if he doesn't have haters, he's not happy. So let's not be fooled by this. Oh, poor me. People are hurting my feelings.
No, Scott, I'll tell you, man, I'm happy that you got this harsh feedback. I don't know what it was, but I'm happy in theory that, or in the collective, that you got this harsh feedback. It shows me you're pushing buttons. You're doing something right. I mean, I would keep at it. Now, if you got to make $1 tomorrow, we've talked about it. You find a side gig. You
the corner of Times Square and 10th Avenue.
There you do that, right? But you keep.
I'll buy a bacon wrap hot dog from you, Scott.
Yeah,
I'm selling coffee on the metal cart on the corner of the park.
The point, Scott, is I don't think. I mean, we agreed early on that you cannot be too creative. I don't think Scott, to limit your creativity is sad. I mean, that's a crime to limit anyone's creativity, and particularly the one with the energy and the mission, that you have, Scott, and others like it. So for me, I don't think you're being too creative. I think you're being right where you need to be, and it sparks someone in somebody, and maybe you shift course. Maybe you don't talk about that topic, but
Yeah, and I don't want to make it all about me, but I do
No,
want to
you
say
do. You do.
Yeah.
because
This is true.
narcissism really is just so fun. It's the only way to live your life.
But from a bigger idea, but I think, Scott, like, you're indicative. I think a lot of people, I know a lot of people, when they creative or they get out there or they take a stand or they do something, invariably they face the feedback that you faced.
Yes.
And I think it can stifle so many people. And so I know we're talking about you specifically, but I think it's a message for everybody that you're going to face this, and this may actually be an indicator that you're on the right track.
What about creativity and evil? Have we talked about that?
That is that's a very loaded topic for the.
Go ahead though, Scott. What do you mean by it?
No, I don't want to repeat, because I know people listen to this and they watch it afterwards and we get comments about it, and want to always be respectful of the audience. But it goes as to, I think, thinking about the future. One of the things that I love, and if you all have addressed this before, then, by all means, that's what I get for being creatively late, for coming in.
No, I was joking. We haven't talked about it.
Oh, well, okay. Well, then let's talk about creativity and evil. Do you all think that people can be too creative when it comes to coming up with devious devices or plots and schemes or plans to dominate others? Were certain people being a little bit too creative when they decided that, maybe it'd be a nice idea now to come up with a little plan to just take over another country? Didn't ask for us to come there.
Yeah.
Can there be too much creativity of that sort? Creative, and this is going to be a little bit grisly, and I don't mean to turn the conversation sour, but again, sort of moving from the extreme. Criminals, people that come up with these elaborate plans to steal money, like Ponzi scheme people, or even people that do physical harm against other people, but they come up with these elaborate disguises or these elaborate backstories that enable them to commit these crimes. Can they be deemed too creative?
Well, it's interesting because I don't think creativity isn't limited to good people, right? Or to do-gooders. We were talking about earlier, we are all innately creative, and when you think about any type of strength that someone has, you can use it for good, you can use it for evil. Too much too much creativity in someone who, a lot of people talk about money doesn't change a person, right? If you're a good person and you have more money, you'll use it for good, right? If you are an evil person and you have more creativity or you have a creative mind, you'll use it for more evil. So, I mean, again, there's this idea that we cannot say only people who are going to use creativity for good can have unlimited creativity, right? And people who are going to use it for evil can only have limited creativity. So the short answer is I guess yes, clearly there's a lot of evil out there, and there's a lot of creativity behind that, and we see the results of it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think creativity comes from within the human, or does it come from something outside of humanity? Providence, the universe, God?
To the point about evil, I just want to say this, Scott, that most, if not almost all, 99.9% of humans are good. But that doesn't make the news. And good and evil, again, are just constructs in our world. We've talked about it, and we can go beyond good and evil, but we realize what's good. The things are relative, but when we agree that something is good and something is bad, we've all made an agreement within a certain entity, a country, a culture, a world, a family, a neighborhood, that this is good and that's bad. But with that in mind, with that agreement in place, most of what we consider good in the world is people follow. The evil gets the headlines, as we all know. So I just want to say that, we can equate creativity with evil, but I know that, for the most part, I think that most creativity, the uniqueness, the imagination, the begetting, the birthing of things is done for good things in life. So I just wanted to qualify that, because we can talk about evil geniuses, but they're few and far between. Unfortunately, they get most of the headlines. And to your point about whether it comes in, I think we all agreed that it's the creativity is within inside us. And the blockers to creativity are separate from creativity itself. The blockers are lack of self-worth, feeling of being rejected, not wanting to open your mouth because you're ridiculed, feeling that you aren't that smart, that you aren't that creative, so you don't even go there. You're tired, you don't want to do the work. But I think the feeling is that creativity, which is really these new ideas, are all there inside of us. And that would make someone like Vaughn so important in these workshops or your speeches, is to really be able to pull it out figuratively and literally, so that we can all benefit from it.
And the idea that we are all innately, like Casey's saying, we're innately creative. So I think like as you're saying, it is internal, but we can be inspired by external.
Are there new ideas, or are there simply new ways to look at the original ideas?
I think Casey talked about that a little bit earlier. This idea that, and I'm of the same mindset. Like there's ideas are all out there, and the new ideas are, how do you express them differently? How do you put the ideas out there together differently? That's where like the new creativity innovation is coming from, I believe.
Go ahead, Casey, please. No, please.
I was just gonna say again, I don't think there are any new ideas, and it's how we package them. I think also, I just want to add what Vaughn said, is that I think it's also inherent. It's a level of boldness. It's a level of courage to take an old idea, a recycled idea, something, and then reintroduce it. And I'm not saying recycle sequels and do the Steven Spielberg movie. Like, you don't really need to see the sharks, the gang. What was the movie that came out? Not on the waterfront. What was the movie that he just did? But recycling old movies. You don't need to necessarily do that for a new generation. It doesn't always work. But I do think that there's a certain level of boldness and insight that it takes to reintroduce ideas to new generations, new people.
Do you think machines and AI will ever be able to be truly creative?
If creativity is being able to birth new things, I do. I think machines and AI, though, for the most part, when it's automated, what it's doing is being able to take rote and manual processes and being able to recognize gaps and being able to essentially take things that we don't want to do and do them quicker and do them in a better way. So that enables us to kind of really be able to take what our human skills are the best. I don't see, as much as the scary stories around automation taking over humans, I see AI and machine learning, when done right, as being a complement and freeing us in many ways. So I see a creativity in the sense they can do some things, but essentially I think AI and machine learning and all of that is creative. And look what we've done. It's a new way of delegating tasks.
Vaughn? Oleg?
I think to what Casey mentioned. So first thing, Casey, I'm going to acknowledge this again, because I like to do it when the credit's due, and that's, you're a true genius when it comes to explaining these things. And I really mean it. Like, the way you just broke that down, I was sitting there, it's like, wow, like I get it now. So I think for me, what comes to mind is, AI and machine learning, that's been around for quite some time. And I would say within the past 2 to 3 years, I've started to have a lot more conversations with people about, is there ever going to be a time when they take over? Google's been around for however many years by now. Google Translate, other translation machines have been around for so many years. So I don't know if it's necessarily about, is there ever going to be a time when they take over? I think it's more along the lines of what Casey said. It's, how do we work with partnership in that? And I think there's a choice, right? I think that's the other thing. I think there's an individual choice, and that is my choice to learn a technology and understand how I can use it as a complement to my life and my processes. Or there's the choice of, it's too complicated, I can't do it, I don't have the time, variety of other things, and then letting the technology get ahead of you to a point where it does create fear to step into that space and play with it. So I think that's the thing, in my opinion, that sometimes gets forgotten, is that element that you do have a choice. Everything's upgrading, everything's quote unquote improving on a daily basis. But going back to your point, Scott, do I want to be a victim to the circumstances, or do I want to find whatever courage I have to step into it and make the most out of the circumstances?
I'm building up to an argument here, by the way.
Please.
So,
please.
Vaughn,
I sense it.
yes. Do you want to answer this?
Yeah,
Do you
bring it
want
on.
to put your little feet into the trap?
Bring it on.
I'm gonna let you go ahead and run with your argument. Maybe I'll have a counter to you. Go for it.
Do you?
Because you won't listen to us anyway, you know.
What'd you say?
You won't listen to us anyway. What?
Yeah, that's creative.
Okay. Yeah, creative thinking. Yeah, creative listening. I like it.
Yeah, I got told recently I need to take some listening classes, so I'm gonna shut up in response to that. Well, let me ask you this. Anyone, do you all believe in it? If this may have been discussed earlier in the hour, do you all believe that being creative is fundamental to being human?
I think we all agree on that. Yeah.
Have you all, I'm going to bring my favorite topic, Greek mythology, into this. Have you all ever heard of Theseus's ship?
I have not.
I'm going to tell a little story, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this. Theseus was someone who was vying to be the king of Athens. And Athens had had a war with Crete years before. And the reason why this war occurred was because there was this half-man, half-bull monster called the Minotaur that was the child of the queen of Crete. And the Minotaur was huge, it was terrifying, and it only ate human flesh. And now, they couldn't kill the Minotaur because it was the son of the royal family. But what they did is they built a huge labyrinth underground, and they threw the Minotaur in there. And then Crete decided to go to war against other city-states to find victims to feed the Minotaur. And one of the city-states that they had gone to war with was Athens, where Theseus lived, and Athens lost. And so every 9 years, I think it was 14 young people were sent to Crete to be thrown in the labyrinth and fed to the Minotaur. Eventually, enough was enough. Theseus said, I'm going to build a ship. And it's going to be a special ship with certain color of sails. And we're going to sail to Athens with our little 14-person tribute to the Minotaur. And I'm going to murder that thing. And this problem is going to go away. And he did. And then he took that ship back and he planted it on at a port in Athens. And for hundreds and hundreds of years later, literally hundreds and hundreds of years later, that actually he parked it on one of a Greek island. It wasn't in Athens. And people from Athens would go to this Greek island and they would see this ship. And this ship sat there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, we all know that some old wooden ship could not withstand being out in island weather. There was no protection. There was water going everywhere, tides and floods and rain and wind and all that sort of stuff for hundreds and hundreds of years. So what was really happening with Theseus's ship? What would happen is that when a plank would start to go bad, they would replace that plank. Then they would replace another. And then they would replace another. And the philosophical question was, at what point was Theseus's ship not Theseus's ship at all? Because at some point after hundreds of years, every single plank had been replaced. If it is to be if to human beings creativity is fundamental to being humans, what do we think about the possibilities that AI, mechanics, and robotics bring to our very humanity? If we believe that things like AI and robots and these other advanced technologies are not able to be creative in the same way that humans are, but our willingness and ability to replace our own parts with these things continues apace.
Well, so I guess my take on AI is we're trying to do is to mimic some of humans' cognitive abilities in machines. So the vacuum cleaner that goes around your house can recognize that has been in the living room and doesn't go in there. So for me, I don't know. We're not cloning. We're not cloning humans.
Replacing brain cells, replacing parts of the brain that may have died, maybe enhancing the brain, maybe putting in sort of little nanotechnologies that change how the brain operates.
You're saying into machines?
Yeah.
I mean, we could, but that's not AI. That's
It's a mechanical technology.
right. My current take with AI and machine learning is we're taking it's literally taking a certain level of intelligence that humans have and replicating it in a machine format, in a machine delivery system. Doesn't mean all aspects. We're not teaching them to be con men or to be, to be quarterbacks or to be, you name it. We're literally teaching machines how to do things primarily we don't want to do anymore.
Yeah.
If there was a deficiency in someone's brain that caused them to lose capacity in the area that generated a certain type of creativity, and there was an operation in which something artificial could be implanted into the brain to rejuvenate that, would you all do it? And when would that make you more or less human?
Got you asking some questions. Like, it's so interesting. Like, would I do it? I have no idea if I would do that or not. I get your point with the myth and this and that story. And yeah, like if we got to the point, like if we're the ship and we replace every single part of us with robotics, our brain, every single cell. But I think it's to me right now, it's far-fetched, right? And I'm like, I'm not even thinking that far ahead. Like I'm thinking like, oh, great. Like, oh, facilitation in the metaverse. Let me explore that, right? Because it sounds interesting to me. And it may be another tool I can use. So I think I'm in my range right now is how can I use technology? How can I use AI to benefit myself? Explore creativity in different ways, explore my work in different ways. And once I need to replace brain cells with robotics, we can return to this question.
Well, I mean, what about a pacemaker or a knee replacement? I mean, those are all
well, that's exactly
artificial things.
That's exactly the point.
They already use things like that for Parkinson's.
Yeah,
exactly.
I find it very creative for us to mimic and replace certain aspects of our body that have degraded under the idea that we want to live longer. Maybe they've degraded for a reason and we should take that as a hint and move on. But since we all do want to live longer and we want to live long lives and we don't want to die, assuming that's the priority, I find it very creative that we find ways to supplement and complement our joints and bones to live longer. Now, would I replace my brain? The brain's a different organ than the ligaments around a knee. So you're playing with something that we know so little about the brain. It'd be difficult for me to implant a V chip in there, or to do so without hesitation. So,
if you couldn't be creative anymore, would you want to live?
Well,
if someone told you lost your creativity, would you kill yourself?
Maybe, because the opposite of creativity is boredom. So that's what I believe. So if you told me I'm going to live a boring life and think boring thoughts and just be ultimately bored my whole life, that'd be a difficult sentence.
For me, the opposite of creativity was death. So yeah, probably.
I'm a wait and see. Let me see how I feel about creativity before I commit to killing myself.
Right, because we're holding you to this. We're saving this video. Exactly. And by the way, we're coming to your house. And if you stop being creative, and we're pointing to this video and expecting you to act Von Lie.
Exactly. I mean,
hey, as a way to move this conversation into a different creative direction, how can people connect with everyone here? Mr. Mason or Vaughn, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, like I just like Scott, I have a second home on LinkedIn, so you can always find me on LinkedIn. And then also, I'm very much open. I tell people this all the time when I do speaking engagements. Reach out to me, just email me. I will email you back, and we will get on a call and have a conversation. That's pretty much how Scott and I met, right? We kind of like we're introduced, and we're both very open to just having new friends, making new connections.
And I actually consider every single person on this show right now to be someone that's very dear to me because of that sort of connection Thank you for raising that, Vaughn.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Mason, for you?
You can find me via LinkedIn or Instagram. On LinkedIn, I'm s.scottmason. On Instagram, I am s.scott_mason. Not one of these plain Jane Scott Masons, s.scott. Got to bring a little bit of creativity into the house, y'all. And you can find out more about me as well at the website for my podcast, Purpose Highway, which is purposehighway.com.
Casey.
And you can find me at leavelawbehind.com, where I help unhappy attorneys to career transition to non-law careers that they love and are good at.
And I would say for me, you cannot find me anywhere. I'm off the grid. I'm kidding. No, it's at Overcoming Odds or LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you choose to look up. Those will be the best places. And I want to thank the three of you for this conversation and everything that we've discussed. I mean, we've literally gone from I don't know where. We started from the simple creative process to everything that has to do with parenting. It's been quite something. I'm really glad we were able to share that.
Thanks for having us, Oleg.
Mm-hmm.
And it is always good to see those that stop by, including our homegirl, Jessica Dugas.
Mm-hmm.
Very creative.
Mr. Mason, would you like to briefly introduce our sponsor as we wrap this up?
Speaking of creativity, one of the most creative visionaries I've ever met is by the name of Patrick Bardsley. He, because of his passion and his belief in human possibility, as well as the ability to tap into his own creativity, founded a company by the name of Spectrum Designs. Spectrum Designs is a t-shirt and apparel printing and embroidery company that employs almost exclusively folks that are on the autistic spectrum, folks that have a near 90% unemployment rate. Not only does he give them jobs that are meaningful and creative, but he also provides them with actual career paths. Mm-hmm. They do amazing quality work. I have worn their shirts before, including a logo shirt for this very show, as well as been to their factory, and you will never step foot into an organization where there is so much joy, love, appreciation, and boundless creativity. Spectrum Designs. Have your t-shirts printed or your shirts or your hats embroidered there. You will not regret it. Tell us a little bit more about them. Oleg, come on.
No way! Look at those shirts.